Hello, everybody. Here is another reading of something that I wrote to sort of elaborate on something which I find very important. Many people, they believe that they can just watch their thoughts. This whole issue of mindfulness is coming up repeatedly, that we can be mindful, that we can be conscious of ourselves and so forth. But I've got something very important to say about that, because there is a difference between what I call embodied language and disembodied language. And in disembodied language, we do not listen to ourselves. And disembodied language is the way of speaking that we are used to, in which we can never ever truly express who we are. Yeah. So the way of talking that we are used to is such that we disembody our language, that we do not have an experience of our body while we speak, because we do not listen to ourselves while we speak. Consequently, we entertain all kinds of nonsense about inner language, as if there is language that exists inside of us. And I will, in this writing, explain to you there is no such thing as language inside of us. There is no inner conversation, and unless we begin to use our embodied language and tell ourselves repeatedly, because we have to counteract our conditioning history, we need to tell ourselves repeatedly that there are no, what we call thoughts. Thoughts is inner language. There exist no thoughts inside of us. There is no inner language inside of us. There is no mind. We do have language, for sure, and language is an overt phenomenon, which means that if I speak, you can hear it, and if I write, you can read it. But it never was a covert phenomenon. The fantasy about inner language is caused by a way of speaking in which we cannot be truthful about ourselves. Now, there is a huge difference between watching your so-called thoughts, or what is called so-called mindfulness, and saying to yourself what you are capable of saying and want to say, and to listen to it and to act on it. So in embodied language, you begin to just sit by yourself and tell yourself what you are supposedly thinking or what you are feeling. You basically say to yourself whatever you are capable of saying, and you find that you are able to say much, much, much more than you have ever said in any conversation with anybody you have ever had. Well, that is because you are now engaging in embodied language. You feel a liberating effect because you are stepping out of that conditioning, which has imprisoned you and which has burdened you with the false notion of inner language. So I read one more time the first sentence of this writing. There is a huge difference between watching your so-called thoughts, or what is called mindfulness, and saying to yourself what you are already capable of saying to yourself, and what you want to say to yourself, and to listen to it and then to act on it. Yeah, there's going to be a whole different way of life when you begin to do that. So in the former, where you supposedly watch your thoughts, you keep on living in the la-la land of your own fantasy, that there is language inside of your skin. But in the latter, in which you listen to yourself because you speak with yourself, and you still may believe that you're speaking about your thoughts, but you're not speaking about your thoughts. You just imagine that you're speaking about your thoughts. Once you begin to really speak with yourself, you realize, no, there are no thoughts. You're just saying whatever you're capable of saying and whatever you want to say. So in the latter, you will hear the difference between your disembodied language and your embodied language, which means you will hear the difference between when you listen to yourself while you speak and when you do not listen to yourself while you speak. And as long as you don't like what you say to yourself, you still engage in disembodied language. And that is how you were conditioned. You don't like to hear it. You don't like to hear, your trouble. You don't like to hear your struggle. You don't like to hear your irritation. You don't like to hear your own negativity. You don't like to hear your problems. Why? There's a reason why. Because you're not being true to yourself. Yes, when you keep on talking with yourself only about your negative stuff, you are not being true to yourself. Once you're being true to yourself, you start enjoying yourself. So, you don't like to hear your disembodied language because you are not true to yourself, although you don't realize this. After you have acknowledged for yourself that you don't want to express or listen to your own disembodied language, because you have to sort of just acknowledge for yourself, like, I don't want to hear all this negative stuff, I don't want to hear my doubts. I don't want to hear my anger. I don't want to hear my frustration. I don't want to hear my hatred, my jealousy, and all this stuff, my confusion. So after you've acknowledged for yourself that you don't want to express and listen to your disembodied language, your disembodied language begins to lose its grip on you, and you begin to have some moments of embodied language. It will occur if only you would take time to listen to you long enough, to speak with yourself long enough, to make your language what it has always been, overt to yourself, and to convince yourself, like, yes, now I can hear what I'm thinking. No, you're not thinking it. Now you can hear what you're saying. It is immediately clear that everything is very different with your embodied language. And every time your disembodied language stops and changes into embodied language, you prefer your embodied language. Although, to your own frustration and puzzlement, your disembodied language still continues. That conditioning is not all of a sudden gone, although you discover your ability to have embodied language. So when you talk out loud by yourself, with yourself, you'll notice that you don't want to waste any more time on your disembodied language. But it happens anyway, because you were conditioned that way, to not listen to yourself. That's it. You were conditioned to authority outside of you, to someone else. You were never allowed to listen to yourself. Nobody ever told you this. That's important, that you should talk with yourself and listen to yourself. You should talk with yourself so that you could hear yourself. Instead of supposedly watching your thoughts, as people believe to be doing while they are meditating, it's also such a hoax. So instead of supposedly watching your thoughts, as people believe to be doing while they are meditating, you are, to some extent, able to recognize that you can prevent yourself from expressing your disembodied language. So you begin to talk with yourself, and you begin to actually recognize, like, I don't want to talk like this. I don't want to hear this. I don't want to sound like it. So instead of watching your thoughts, you begin to realize, like, no, I don't like that way of talking. I don't like to hear that. Yeah. And if you would write it down, you would also be bored with your own writing. You wouldn't like your writing. You wouldn't, you get writer's block, okay? You don't want to read it. But you will, if you are starting to talk with yourself, you will come to a point where you say, like, nah, I don't like my own disembodied language. And you begin to be able to prevent yourself a little bit, And as you do this, you give yourself opportunity to have more embodied language. And the better you get in identifying the difference between your disembodied language and your embodied language, the more capable you become in ignoring and avoiding your own disembodied language. And to have embodied language instead. And I just want to emphasize here, there's nothing to do with watching your thoughts. Forget about that. It is because you have said what you wanted to say and you have heard what you didn't want to hear. And you have said no more of that. Okay. Of course, if your disembodied language still demands your attention, there's nothing else you can do than to express it again and to hear your own misery, to hear your own anger, to hear your own frustration. You don't like it. And admit that you don't like it. You don't want it. And you're glad when you're finally done with it so that you can have embodied language again. Yeah. In effect, rather than meditatively watching your unexpressed fantasies about your inner conversation with yourself, your so-called mind, you literally wait for the oh yeah, you literally wait for the smoke of your disembodied language to lift. Yeah. So you can, after you've recognized it a couple of times, you can just basically say, no, I'm just keeping my mouth shut. I'm not going to say that kind of stuff anymore. I don't want to hear it. I don't want to get into it. So now you just wait. You're not watching your thoughts. No, you just wait until the smoke of your disembodied language lifts. And not until this thought passes, not until this, I don't know, this dark mind sort of just dissolves. No. You just basically refrain from disembodied language. You inhibit your disembodied language. You control yourself. Yes, good. So that you can have embodied language. Yeah. Oh, I'm doing myself such a favor. Now I can enjoy myself. Moreover, once you are able to have ongoing embodied language, yes, you don't feel so much of an urge anymore to talk out loud with yourself, as you really know that any reference to your so-called thoughts or your inner experience, your belief, your perception of your reality, your consciousness, is merely a faulty expression about non-existent language inside your body. Come on. The word tree is not to be found anywhere inside your brain. The word tree is just a simple word, okay? A word tree is not found anywhere inside of you, but it is only overtly expressed, said, listened to, written, or read. This issue of us being without our so-called mind, being without inner language, is of utmost importance, as it drags us into disembodied language again and again. So the assumption that there is inner language is what drags us into a disembodied language again and again. Yeah. So it's so crucially important that we recognize that. Our embodied language only stabilizes, I speak from experience, it only stabilizes once we are 100% certain, yeah, totally resolved, that there is and there never was any language inside of us. Yes, we need to maybe say this 100 million times, but it will eventually begin to have its effect because it is true. And we have to, like I said, counteract our own conditioning. Each time we appear to be thinking again something, which we still continue in spite of the fact that we may have acquired ongoing embodied language. So at a certain moment, you can have embodied language and you say, now things are going right. Yeah, and you see the positive consequences of your ongoing embodied language. It's great, You keep going, but you still have these thoughts. You still have this imaginary fancy about having an inner language. Thoughts in your head, problems, you worry about something, you stress out about something. There's all these kind of connotations. You feel like you're stupid, or there's all kinds of things wrong with you. You feel like you have inner conflict or whatever. So in spite of the fact that you have ongoing embodied language, you still seem to be having thoughts. But by telling ourselves and by hearing ourselves say that it is really true, the reality is our language is always, yes, repeat after me, our language is always overt. Yes, that just means that it is outside of us. It is not within our skin. It is outside of our skin. How did we come to believe in inner language? Well, it is due to our way of talking, our usual way of talking, disembodied language, in which we cannot really be ourselves and fully express who we are. It is so obvious that we are burdened with this fantasy of inner language due to the fact that we cannot have honest conversation. Also, the word tree, the word tree is not the tree. The tree is a reality, but the word refers to this reality. Likewise, our body without our language is a reality. And the experiences inside our body, of course, we have real experiences inside our body, also a reality, but without language. Inside our body, there is no language. Our overt embodied language is the way in which we refer to our experience. Once we are clear that our experience inside our body is always without language, we adopt a whole new way of reasoning. We no longer refer to what we think or feel, but to what we say or write and hear and read. Although we still, out of old habit, speak of what we think and feel, because that's still not going to go away. We will continue to do that probably for some time to come. But this whole confusion about what is the difference anyway? I've always wondered about this. Like, what's the difference between what we feel and say? I say it, I think it, or I feel it. To me, it was always the same. But in any case, this whole confusion about so-called difference between what we feel and think is completely dissolved in embodied language. Because we say it, we hear it, we write it, and we can read it. Yes. And it is overt. Okay? Yeah. In effect, we become more sensitive and less emotionally obsessed. More reasonable, but less hung up on words and on the verbal. Yeah? Have you ever heard the saying, hey, speaker, it's not what you say, it's how you say it? Well, when are we ever going to pay attention to how we say things? It's when we listen to ourselves. Yes. Indeed. Once the non-verbal aspect of our verbal behavior is coming to our attention, in embodied language, we listen to ourselves while we speak, then we use our language, our embodied language, we use our language effectively. And that, my friends, are my future friends, I hope you connect with me and we talk about this. That is our language enlightenment. Okay.